to the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, the fortnightly podcast that explores self awareness, leader effectiveness, and leadership at all levels. Join me, your host, Nia Thomas, as we talk to today's Knowing Self, Knowing Others guest. Wonderful, Sally Evans. It's absolutely fabulous to have you here with me today as my guest on my podcast. And I was trying to think when the last time we had a conversation. I'm sure it must be about a year ago when I was lucky enough to join you and two of your colleagues on a regular discussion forum that you were having during lockdown. I've really enjoyed it. So I enjoyed watching and I enjoyed listening. So, Sally, please tell us more about it and please do introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you. It's lovely to be with you, Nia, as well. Yes, you are right. Right in the middle of lockdown, of COVID, I got together with some colleagues because it was quite a lonely time for us as individual consultants, just to have a chat really about how things were going. What were we hearing? What were we seeing in the workplace? And what was our take on it really? And it was really popular, and it was great to have you along because, of course, you were very busy at that time in work, and it's always lovely to have that perspective. So, as you were saying, I'm an organizational psychologist and an organizational development consultant, which means I work with organizations in lots of different sectors. So, I'm an independent consultant. And my specialism really is on culture and strategy and executive level leadership support. But interestingly, actually, the last year or so, I've been working with a lot of education senior teams. So that's been really interesting here in South Wales, working with a considerable number of schools leadership teams, helping them think through what is culture, what's the strategy for the school, because really schools are organisations, but I don't think they've always seen it that way. And their mechanism for leadership and their awareness of leadership and the impact on the wider community is been really crucial. So that's really exciting work, I think, and it really links with your topic of self-awareness, because as leaders in education, their focus is always on the children. And yet what I'm encouraging them to do is to think about focusing more on the staff in the school and really thinking about their relationships with parents and building connections within the community. So self-awareness is really crucial. So I'm really excited to be talking about the topic.
How brilliant and how very interesting do you think that COVID has changed how people are seeing leadership in their organizations? Do you think that's one of the catalysts why people are now maybe thinking about themselves as a leadership team rather than solely focusing on the children?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that question around how COVID has changed leadership in organizations is massive for every single organization. I think in education specifically, schools are now the center of their communities. And as we enter into, an even more difficult time post COVID, with the cost of living and the economy as it is, schools are the centre of their communities, and supporting families within the communities to flourish, and to get through difficult times is actually now a key part of schools. It isn't just solely about the education of children, but I think in general in organisations, there's been a massive shift. Really, I think pre-COVID. Organizations, the relationship was employer employee, with the power, I think, with the employer. Post COVID, I'm seeing a slight shift the other way. As an organizational psychologist, I think, to particularly for those choosing to work from home, that 50% or so of people, where the shift now is with the employee saying, this is how I want to work, where I want to work, when I want to work, and organizations having to think about how do we meet in the middle? How do we compromise? How do we work together to achieve what everybody needs to support them working? So again, there's that constant link always to self-awareness, I think, whether it's organizational awareness about what they need, or individual self-awareness about them having the courage, the safety to be able to ask for what they want. So COVID has been a massive disruptor in the workplace. It really has.
Definitely. So interesting. Well, in that case, we will move on to our questions. So, question number one: how do you define self awareness?
I think that's it's very thought-provoking question, and I wouldn't be able to answer it in a single sentence. But I was reflecting on it, and I was thinking, I see it in two ways. I see it internally and externally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think internally, as I see self-awareness, that's my ability to be able to look into myself and to really think about, what are my values? What are my beliefs? How am I behaving today? What are my emotions? How am I feeling? So that's me looking inside and being really clear about what matters to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I have a really good understanding about what matters to me in terms of my values and beliefs, I can go in search. Remember, I'm an organizational psychologist, so I can go in search of a role that is good for me, that enables me to use my strengths, that enables me to be around people who have similar values and beliefs, which means I'll feel more comfortable. So going inside into myself and knowing myself well
Mm-hmm.
is really important. That's one aspect of it. And the external aspect is my relationship with others then. So how do I choose to adapt my behavior? How do I know, for example, how I choose to communicate? What's my preference for how I absorb information, how I communicate? What impact does that have on other people? And therefore, do I need to adapt how I am with them? Do I need to change? If I want to influence a relationship, if I want to improve a relationship, I've really got to think about, how do I communicate? How do I build a relationship with this person? So that's external to me. That's me taking my internal thinking and applying it externally to the outside world. So self-awareness, I think, is that ability to be able to really go into myself, but then use that information outside in terms of building relationships with others.
Oh, that's really interesting. So you mentioned the word influence, and that probably takes us very nicely onto question two.
Mm-hmm.
Question number two. Do you think there is a relationship between self-awareness and leader effectiveness?
If I could just say yes, and that would be the end of the podcast. Yeah, it's a fundamental need, I
Yep.
think, for any leader. And I say that because I have been a leader myself.
Okay.
So I was a leader for 25 years in the public sector.
Mm-hmm.
And the last team I was responsible for was about 1,000 people.
Okay, so big team.
So that's not completely responsible for 1,000, but as a director responsible for 1,000 people, accountable for the results of that part of the organization. So I bear the scars of getting it wrong. And I
Okay.
think about my own leadership journey. When I looked at that question and I thought, how would I answer? I would say absolutely yes.
Mm-hmm.
My job now, working with leaders in organizations, is to support them, to hold the mirror up. Sometimes I work as an executive coach with senior leaders to hold the mirror up and help them develop their self-awareness so that they can really think about the impact that they are having in their organizations and the influence that they want to have with others. But I come to that through the experience of
Mm-hmm.
getting it wrong, because I
Yep.
think that's where I've learned my very best lessons about my self-awareness.
Yeah.
When there are times when I look back on the early days of my career and think, oh my goodness, why did I do that? And look at the impact that had, and look at the
Yeah.
damage potentially
Mm-hmm.
that I did. Because I think, in my early days of management, and we're talking about management and leadership, but my
Mm-hmm.
very early days of management, you realize that you have so much responsibility.
Yeah.
How you create the environment in work, the safety, the fun, the environment that you create for work makes a difference as to whether somebody goes home and kicks the cat at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
How they
Absolutely.
are in work. And obviously pre-COVID, that was crucial because people were together a considerable amount of time, and the environment that we create, and that comes down to the leader's ability to be really self-aware about how they're behaving, what they're asking of their teams, how they're communicating, the level of collaboration and safety that they create within the environment is crucial. So I absolutely believe you cannot be an effective leader without good quality self-awareness.
Fabulous. Very interesting coming from the perspective of that insight of been there, done that, got the
Oh, yeah.
t-shirt and some of the scars too.
Yes, definitely.
Question number 3. Do you think effective leaders can be found at all levels of organizations?
Yes, absolutely. But I think what matters there, it comes back to your definition of leadership, I guess, doesn't it? And
True.
I always think of leaders, I would write it with a little L, not a big L.
Hmm.
Having worked in the public sector, in fact, I was going to reflect back on my 30-year career in the public sector, but I was talking to somebody actually only the other day who is 23 and
Yeah.
very new in an organization, very young in their career,
Hmm.
and so self-aware.
Yeah.
And as I was listening to their ideas, and it was part of a team building activity that we were doing, and I was looking at the way that they were working the room, I was thinking, oh my gosh, there's a leader. There's a
Mm.
leader. You know,
100%.
somebody. What was lovely is it was face to face. We were in a face, so
Yeah.
it was really great to see everybody in the room together. But I could see that person already, very young in their career, very junior in their role. But because I think, and they don't realize that they've got this ability. They were quite self-aware. They knew when to contribute. They knew how to bring other people in. They were
Ah,
nodding and encouraging other people's contributions. And I was thinking, there's a leader. You know, there's a
leader in
leader
waiting,
already.
certainly. So,
Yeah.
you said that they had some awareness of when to operate in that particular way, but maybe not the awareness that you were observing and able to see, actually, I can see the direction of travel of this individual. They have skills, they have qualities, maybe that is clearly starting to show already.
Yeah, I would say that what they were displaying was largely intuitive.
Hmm.
I think, I don't know. Remember, I talked about internal self-awareness,
Yeah.
external self. I was observing the external self-awareness.
Yeah.
I was observing them really thinking, well, perhaps not even thinking about it. I think it was intuitive. They were collaborative, they were contributing, participating, but they were also leading a conversation. They felt they were brave in terms of the contributions that they were making, the comments that they were making. There was none of this, oh, I'm new to the team, or I'm young, or
Uh-huh.
I don't know what I'm talking about. They were throwing things in for other people to critique. And I was thinking about that. That's largely what that was doing. It was leading the way and showing a level of vulnerability that meant other people felt comfortable contributing.
Yeah.
I wasn't in a position to take them to a side and say, do you know that you're doing this? Is this deliberate? Is this
Yeah.
what you're doing? Because I have no idea what their internal
Mm.
self-awareness is like in terms of whether or not that was what they were planning to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. But yeah, as you're saying, it's that observation, but without sitting down and unpicking that with somebody who knows
Yeah.
what's going on in that internal self-awareness.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, I think if we were doing a personality test or we were looking, for example, at their strengths, we'd be saying they have high levels of social intelligence. We might,
Uh-huh.
they might be measured on that
Yeah.
scale, if you like. They were somebody who was demonstrating a really effective ability to be able to work with others. I guess what we don't know is what is their self-awareness like?
Absolutely. Question number 4. Do you think leaders at the most strategic level of organizations have greater self-awareness than leaders at other levels of organization? And I'm not sure if what we've just talked about partially answers that.
Yeah. The way I'm feeling at the moment, I feel like saying they don't. But oh my goodness, I have worked over the last sort of 8 years or so that I've been in consultancy with, well, even beyond that, my 30 years in the public
Mm.
sector with very senior leaders with the most appalling low levels of self-awareness.
Interesting.
And it has been painful.
Mm.
It has been really painful because when people get to very senior levels in the organization and fail to have the ability to be able to sit with themselves and reflect on the impact that their behavior is having, it can cause so much difficulty across the organization. There's a famous quote, isn't there? When we're in leadership, we cast a long shadow. My
Yeah.
goodness,
Yeah.
I have used that quote so many times. Um, and I think it's very dangerous to assume that the higher you go, the more likely you are to have self-awareness. And I say that again from my own experience. I worked really hard with my teams over the years to encourage them to sit with me in that space and
Mm.
answer my questions, which is what can I do differently? Because from a self-awareness perspective, we can spend all the time we like in introspection. I could
Mhm.
sit there and say, why did that go the way that it did?
Yeah.
Why didn't that person do what I wanted them to do? And I
Mhm.
used to spend a lot of time thinking that, why don't they do that? Why
Yeah.
I just asked that question. Why don't they do it that way? And then, but that's not going to answer the question. So
Yeah.
over the years, what I realized was actually the very best questions are when we can create a safe environment with people where actually my questions to them are, what am I doing that's helping you?
Yeah.
What do I need to do more of?
Mhm.
What do I need to stop doing? What am I
Mhm.
doing that's getting in the way of you being great? And
Mm.
really, so asking them the questions and their what questions. So I was sitting there in glorious isolation thinking, why aren't people doing what they're doing? But actually, I'm just going to go round in a big loop there.
Mhm.
The very best questions were when I opened up with people and said, I want to be a better leader, but the only way I can be a better leader is if you give me information. It's a bit like, do you remember Johari's window?
Yeah.
Do you remember
Yeah.
that? I think I know about
Mhm.
myself, you know bits about me, but there are bits about me that you know that I don't know, and I need
Yeah.
you to give those to me. And it took years. It takes a long time to build up that trust with your teams so that they feel comfortable. And then I can
Definitely.
remember once being in a leadership meeting and talking, get very excited about something. And I can remember one of my team saying, stop, enough, Sally. No, we don't think this is the right way to go, and you need to slow down a moment. And I remember the
Oh.
moment he said that in front of everyone else, I thought, I'm there.
Aha.
When my team feel able to
Yeah.
say no in front of each other and be brave enough to do that, I've got there.
Yes, definitely.
That's so, that self-awareness isn't, in my mind, doesn't come from me. It grows through the feedback that we have from other people. But you have to work really, really hard
Yeah.
to build the relationship so people feel able to give you that feedback so that you can grow.
So that external self-awareness is a two-way street that actually you can be as externally self-aware as you like, but actually, unless you're getting that feedback and that mirror is put back up to you, you don't know how much of that is reality or your perception, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And there is also, I'm a massive, I'm a big user of personality
Mhm.
psychometrics, which we use quite a lot. So there is also that element. I work a lot with senior leaders to help them understand this is your style, this is
Mhm.
your preference, these are your traits. Now we need to think about how does that manifest itself in the workplace
Yeah.
and what impact will that have. Self-awareness is our ability to be able to adapt when we're working in a one-to-one with somebody and their style is different to ours. Then
Mhm.
how do we adapt? And somebody said to me the other day, oh, that sounds very manipulative.
Oh,
And I said, but my idea around that is, what is the intent?
yeah.
If your intent is to build a better relationship and build an environment of trust, then as leaders, we have to adapt and change our approach in order to meet what the other person needs, to make them feel safe. And their interpretation was that's manipulative. My interpretation of that's using really good quality self-awareness in order to build the trust that we need in a relationship. Because at some point, I'm going to pull on that lever. I'm going to ask a favor. I'm going to need you to do something
Yeah.
that you don't want to do. And if we've got a good relationship, then that'll be okay.
Yeah.
You'll accept that, So it isn't always about developing a relationship so everything's pink and rosy and
Mm.
everyone's happy. Sometimes it's going to be really difficult. So I think your question was, yeah, do leaders at the most strategic levels
It was.
have good self-awareness? And I think I worry actually that I wonder sometimes whether they had it and they've lost it as they get
Mm.
more senior
Yeah.
because of the role that they have, because of the demands that people have on them, because they're busy, busy, busy.
Yeah.
Or actually, in some cases, have they risen so quickly that actually they didn't ever have the value of great feedback.
Interesting. The feedback that I had as part of my research said exactly the same as you, that actually the more strategic leaders, people felt that actually they didn't have that self awareness. And then
Yeah.
it comes to the question of how do people get or rise to those positions when they don't have self awareness? If we're saying self awareness is so fundamental, how do they get there?
Yeah, yeah. Um, my inclination is to look at the recruitment assessment and selection process for promotion for staff.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because that is fundamentally flawed
Yep.
and quite often biased.
Yeah.
And you have to look then. So I work with PLCs, for example,
Hmm.
and in schools, similar structure. You've got an external board appointing a senior leader. In a school, it's exactly the same. You have a
Right.
school board governors appointing a head teacher. It's the same in a PLC, external board appointing a chief exec.
Right.
Look at that group who are making that appointment.
Hmm.
They're very senior people too.
Yeah.
They're going to be looking for people who are similar. And, we still have interview as the primary selection mechanism,
We do.
and
Yeah.
thinking, well, that's just a conversation between two like-minded people. Where's the demonstration of self-awareness? Now, the interesting thing that I would say, though, in education, for example, and in some, really organizations that are really thinking about this, a colleague of mine has just gone through a very extensive 2-day
Mm.
process where she wasn't just interviewed by the board. That was actually the last thing that happened,
Okay.
but actually now people are being brought in front of the pupils,
Hmm.
the parents in this organisation, with the staff, with their teams, so that actually there are different opportunities for them to be able to display what matters to them, their values, their beliefs, what are their drivers, and those sorts of group environments where people can get involved and really start to get to know that person, does delve a little bit more into who that person truly is. There are still issues, obviously, with that mechanism, but that's a little bit broader anyway than just a straightforward interview with the board.
Yeah, most definitely. And yeah, I think you're right that recruitment processes have got a lot to answer for.
Oh, absolutely, they have. Yeah.
So, our very final question: do you think effective leaders have more self awareness than ineffective leaders? And we've probably already covered that as well.
Yes. I think. Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking about some of the really effective leaders that I'm working with at the moment. There's a couple that I've got in mind, um, that I'm thinking about, who are, if, and it goes to the heart, though, of what your definition of effective is.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking of one leader in particular that I work with who is truly effective at managing external stakeholders
Okay.
and really representing the organization well, obtaining funding,
Hmm.
gathering strategic support for that organization. But their self awareness is good in terms of their external self awareness. How they
Yeah.
build relationships and what they need
Okay.
to do strategically. There are times when they're busy, I notice that maybe their internal self-awareness could do with a little bit of work, because
Oh,
they come back to the organization. They've been so used to working in that external world. Their drive, their energy and their passion to move forward can be a bit exhausting for the people that they're around.
oh,
So,
interesting.
so again, it's, what's your definition of effective leader? I think each leader needs to think about, what is their measure of success,
Yeah.
and actually, are they fulfilling it? Because it could be around how they bring in resources, how they drive the organization forward, or it could be around, how they make people feel. So another leader that I'm aware of worked really, really hard over the last 5 years to change the culture within their organization, really
Hmm.
hard. So well-being and staff engagement was really important to them, and they shared a lot of their personal self in terms of role modeling
Right.
psychological safety and creating safe and trusting environments.
Hmm.
There are
Mhm.
some concerns though with the performance in that organization. So it's an organization which attracts people and retains people. And if you ask people, do they enjoy being there? They love working there. Their
Oh.
performance isn't where it needs to be. So does the board measure them as effective?
Mhm.
The staff measure them as effective, but the board aren't necessarily measuring them as effective. So but I still think the really important thing is be clear what's the vision for the organization,
Mhm.
not just in terms of where does the organization need to be, but how do people feel being employed by it? Is it a well organization?
It's interesting that something else that I picked up through my research was that I developed a definition of leader effectiveness, and again, uh, different people have different definitions. But for me, there are two parts to it. One is first order knowledge, which is your technical skills. So, can I fix a bicycle? Can I fill out a grant application form? Can I liaise with external partners? Then you have your second order knowledge, which is the emotional, the relationship, soft skills. I'm not a fan of the word soft skills, relational skills. And you almost sounded like, in the two examples you gave, that you had good examples of first order knowledge, good example of second order knowledge. But what we want is a third example where you put them all together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. And I think they're out there, and I
Mm-hmm.
think the leaders that I'm talking about there are able to do both.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think so. I'm studying for a PhD in organizational health and well-being myself at the moment, as you
Brilliant.
know,
Yeah.
and my interest is in autonomy. In what I'm noticing is the levels of work intensification are
Oh,
massive. Organizations, people within organizations, whether they work at home or are not working at home, are still working harder and harder and longer than they need to be.
no.
Um, Taking the time to step back and say, how do we become more effective? How do we slow things down in this organization so that people are making good quality decisions, so that those leaders have the ability to be able to do both? I've seen them do both. I
Yeah,
think the thing that sometimes prevents them is just exhaustion, is time, it's stress. It's just
definitely.
too much to cope with. So they have the ability, but quite often those are the barriers, I think, to displaying it.
Today we've come to the end of our questions, and I think we could have probably gone on for another couple of
Oh,
hours.
absolutely. Yeah, that
Yeah,
was
really
fun. Thanks
interesting
very much,
topics.
Nia.
Thank you. Hopefully, we will come back and maybe talk a bit more about your PhD. I think it'd be brilliant for us to hear a bit more about that in the future. But for today, thank you so much, Sally. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you for joining me, your host, Nia Thomas, at the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast. If you'd like to know more about self awareness, leader effectiveness, and leadership at all levels, please take a look at my website, knowingselfknowingothers.co.uk. You can also join me on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Make sure you bookmark the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast and tune into the next episode in 2 weeks' time. I look forward to having you on my learning journey.